The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's training grounds as General Marcus Steele reviewed the files spread across his mahogany desk. 23 years of military service had taught him to spot potential from a mile away, but the folder in front of him challenged every assumption he'd ever made. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's record was unlike anything he'd seen. Perfect scores across the board, recommendations that read like fiction, and achievements that seemed too extraordinary to be real. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. General Steele had earned his reputation as one of the toughest commanders in the U.S. Army. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, led special operations that remained classified to this day, and had never met a recruit he couldn't break down and rebuild into a better soldier. His philosophy was simple. Excellence demanded sacrifice, and those who couldn't handle the pressure had no business wearing the uniform. But Lieutenant Chen's file presented an anomaly that gnawed at him. Born in San Francisco to immigrant parents who had fled Vietnam during the war, Sarah had excelled in everything from academics to athletics throughout her childhood. She'd graduated summa cum laude with West Point, with degrees in both mechanical engineering and strategic studies, finishing first in her class of 1,247 cadets. Her physical fitness scores weren't just impressive, they were record-breaking. She'd completed the Ranger School in record time, earned her airborne wings, and had been fast-tracked through advanced leadership courses that typically took officers years to complete. What bothered General Steele wasn't her achievements, it was how effortless they seemed. Every instructor's report mentioned the same thing. Chen made the impossible look routine. She'd completed obstacle courses designed to challenge seasoned Green Berets with time to spare. During war game simulations, her tactical decisions had been studied and incorporated into training manuals. Intelligence officers praised her analytical skills, while combat instructors marveled at her instinctive understanding of battlefield dynamics. The general closed the file and walked to his window, gazing out at the sprawling base where thousands of soldiers trained daily. He'd been ordered to evaluate Chen for promotion to captain and assignment to the elite 75th Ranger Regiment. The Pentagon wanted her fast-tracked, but Steele had reservations. In his experience, soldiers who excelled too easily often crumbled when faced with real adversity. Combat wasn't about perfection. It was about adapting when everything went wrong, surviving when hope seemed lost, and leading others through the darkest moments of their lives. He'd seen promising officers break under pressure, brilliant tacticians freeze when bullets started flying, and decorated heroes abandon their post when fear overwhelmed training. The Army needed soldiers who could endure the unthinkable, not just excel in controlled environments. Chen's record, as impressive as it was, had been built in classrooms and training facilities. She'd never faced the chaos of real combat, never had to make life-and-death decisions with incomplete information, never experienced the weight of watching good soldiers die because of choices she'd made. The intercom on his desk crackled to life. "Sir, Lieutenant Chen is here for her 0800 appointment. Send her in, Sergeant." Chen entered the office with crisp, measured steps. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, and her salute sharp enough to cut glass. Everything about her presentation screamed military precision, yet there was something in her eyes, a quiet confidence that bordered on defiance, that immediately caught the general's attention. "Lieutenant Chen reporting as ordered, sir." General Steele returned her salute and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "At ease, Lieutenant. Please have a seat." As she settled into the chair, maintaining perfect posture, Steele studied her face. She was younger than her 25 years suggested, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room. There was no nervousness in her demeanor, no hint of the anxiety that typically accompanied meetings with senior commanders. If anything, she appeared curious, as if this was just another interesting challenge to overcome. "I've been reviewing your record, Lieutenant. Quite impressive." "Thank you, sir." "Tell me, what drives you? What made you choose the Army over the countless other opportunities someone with your talents might pursue?" Chen's response was immediate and unwavering. "Service, sir. My parents came to this country with nothing but hope and determination. The freedom they found here, the opportunities I've been given, they all exist because people were willing to fight for them. I want to be part of something larger than myself, to protect what matters most." The general nodded, having heard similar responses from countless young officers, but there was something in Chen's delivery, a conviction that went beyond rehearsed platitudes that gave him pause. "Your instructors speak very highly of you. Perfect scores across multiple disciplines, record-breaking performance in physical training, exceptional leadership during field exercises. Some might say you've had things too easy." For the first time, Chen's expression shifted slightly. Not defensiveness, but something closer to amusement. "With respect, sir, I'm not sure how 17-hour training days, sleeping 3 hours a night for months, and competing against the best soldiers in the world could be considered easy." General Steele leaned back in his chair, intrigued by Chen's response. Most young officers would have thanked him for the compliment, or assured him they were ready for greater challenges. Chen had done neither. Instead, she'd quietly corrected his assumption with facts that couldn't be disputed. "Fair point, Lieutenant. But there's a difference between excelling in training and proving yourself in combat. Training has safety nets, predetermined outcomes, controlled variables. Real operations don't offer such luxuries." "No, sir, they don't," Chen agreed. "But training isn't just about memorizing procedures or hitting targets. It's about developing the mental flexibility to adapt when those procedures fail, the physical conditioning to keep fighting when your body wants to quit, and the leadership skills to inspire others when everything seems hopeless. Every challenge I've faced has taught me something about handling uncertainty." The general found himself genuinely impressed by her maturity. Most lieutenants her age spoke in abstract terms about courage and duty. Chen understood that warfare was fundamentally about problem-solving under extreme pressure. "You've been recommended for the 75th Rangers. That's not just an honor, it's one of the most demanding assignments in the Army. Rangers don't just follow orders. They're often the tip of the spear in operations where failure isn't an option. Tell me why you think you're ready for that level of responsibility." Chen's eyes brightened slightly. "Sir, I've studied every major Ranger operation from Normandy to present day. I understand that being a Ranger means being willing to attempt the impossible and succeed anyway. It means being part of a brotherhood where every member trusts that their teammates will never quit, never accept defeat, and never leave anyone behind. I've trained for this my entire military career, not just in terms of skills and tactics, but in terms of mindset." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know I haven't been tested in actual combat yet, sir, but I've been tested in every way the Army knows how, and I've never found my breaking point. Maybe it's because I don't believe I have one." General Steele raised an eyebrow. "Everyone has a breaking point, Lieutenant. The key is knowing where yours is and staying away from it." "With respect, sir, I disagree. I think breaking points are just moments when we decide whether to find a way forward or give up. I've never chosen to give up." The conviction in her voice was absolute. General Steele had heard similar confidence from other young officers, but something about Chen's delivery suggested this wasn't bravado. It was a fundamental truth about who she was. "Interesting perspective," he mused. "But the Army isn't just about individual excellence. Leadership means being responsible for others, making decisions that affect their lives and safety. How do you handle the weight of command?" "By remembering that leadership is a privilege, not a right. Every soldier under my command has trusted me with something precious, their life, their future, their family's well-being. That trust demands that I be better than I think I can be, that I prepare more thoroughly than seems necessary, and that I never make decisions based on ego or convenience." She leaned forward slightly, her intensity palpable.
During advanced infantry training, I led a simulated rescue mission where we had to extract wounded soldiers from a hostile area while under fire. The scenario was designed to force difficult choices: save time or save lives, minimize risk or maximize mission success. Some of the instructors expected me to sacrifice simulated casualties to complete the primary objective. And what did you do? I found a third option. We modified our approach, used unconventional tactics, and extracted everyone while still accomplishing the mission. It took longer, required more resources, and put my team at greater calculated risk in the short term, but every soldier went home alive. General Steele made a note in Chen's file. The scenario she described was one of the most challenging ethical tests in the Army's training arsenal. Most officers chose either mission completion or casualty minimization. Finding a way to achieve both demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking the Rangers needed. Your tactical instructors mentioned that you have an unusual approach to problem solving. Can you elaborate on that? Chen smiled for the first time during their meeting. I suppose I don't think linearly, sir. Most military problems are presented as binary choices: attack or defend, advance or retreat, follow protocol or improvise. But real situations are rarely that simple. There are usually multiple variables that can be adjusted, alternative approaches that haven't been considered, or ways to change the fundamental nature of the problem itself. She gestured toward the tactical maps on the general's wall. Take asymmetric warfare, for example. Traditional military doctrine focuses on force projection and territorial control, but insurgent forces succeed by making the conflict about something entirely different. They make it about endurance, about winning hearts and minds, about making the cost of victory higher than the value of the objective. They change the game instead of trying to win within existing rules. And how would you apply that kind of thinking to conventional military operations? By constantly asking what-if questions that others might not consider. What if the enemy's greatest strength is actually a vulnerability? What if the obvious approach is exactly what they're expecting? What if we could accomplish our objective without engaging directly at all? What if success looked different than we initially imagined? General Steele was beginning to understand why Chen's instructors had been so impressed. She didn't just execute orders effectively, she reimagined the possibilities inherent in any given situation. Lieutenant, I'm going to be frank with you. Your record is exceptional, almost suspiciously so. Some officers might be concerned that you haven't faced enough genuine adversity to prove your resilience. Others might worry that your confidence borders on arrogance. How do you respond to those concerns? Chen's expression grew serious. Sir, I understand those concerns, and I think they're valid questions to ask. Excellence without testing can be hollow, but I'd argue that my background has actually exposed me to more adversity than might be apparent from my military record. She paused, gathering her thoughts. My parents arrived in America with nothing. They worked 3 jobs each, slept in shifts so someone could always watch over my younger brother and me. I learned English by helping them navigate bureaucracy, translate documents, and advocate for themselves in systems designed to exclude people like us. I worked throughout high school and college, not for spending money, but to help keep our family afloat.
The general listened intently as Chen continued, her voice steady but carrying an emotional weight that hadn't been present earlier in their conversation. When I was 16, my father was injured in a construction accident. The doctors said he might never walk again, and for 6 months, our entire family's survival depended on my ability to coordinate his care, manage our finances, and keep everyone's spirits up while maintaining my grades and working part-time. We nearly lost our home twice. She met the general's gaze directly. I learned about pressure long before I ever wore a uniform, sir. Military training has been challenging, but it's never been the hardest thing I've faced. When you've had to choose between buying groceries and paying for your father's medication, when you've had to translate life-changing medical decisions for parents who trusted you completely despite your age, when you've had to be strong for younger siblings who were scared and didn't understand why everything was falling apart, military obstacles feel manageable by comparison.
General Steele found himself reassessing his initial impressions. Chen's confidence wasn't born from inexperience with failure. It came from having navigated genuine crises and emerged stronger. Her achievements weren't the result of favorable circumstances. They represented triumph over significant obstacles. Why didn't any of this appear in your background files? Because it wasn't directly relevant to my military qualifications, sir. The Army cared about my test scores, physical fitness, and leadership potential. My family's personal struggles didn't affect my ability to serve effectively. On the contrary, Lieutenant, this context makes your achievements even more impressive. It also explains something I couldn't quite understand about your responses today. Sir, you speak about adversity and pressure without any fear or anxiety. Most young officers, even exceptional ones, show some nervousness when discussing challenging scenarios. You discuss them like mathematical problems to be solved. That's not typical, unless you've already learned to compartmentalize stress and function effectively under pressure. I suppose that's true, sir. When your baseline is uncertainty and struggle, military challenges feel familiar rather than overwhelming. I know what it's like to have everything depend on making the right decisions with incomplete information and limited resources. General Steele stood and walked to his window again, processing what he'd learned. Chen represented something rarely seen in military service: natural talent forged by genuine adversity and refined through disciplined training. Her achievements weren't flukes or the result of favorable circumstances. They represented the predictable outcome of exceptional capability meeting relentless preparation. Lieutenant, I have one more question for you, and I want you to think carefully before answering. Yes, sir. If I were to approve your assignment to the Rangers, you'd likely be deployed within 6 months. Combat operations, real bullets, life or death decisions with permanent consequences. Are you certain you're ready for that level of responsibility? Chen didn't hesitate. Sir, I've been preparing for that responsibility my entire life, not just through military training, but through every challenge that taught me to think clearly under pressure, to put others' needs before my own, and to find solutions when giving up seemed easier. The Rangers need soldiers who can handle the impossible. I may be young, but I've been handling impossible situations since I was a teenager. She stood, her posture straight and confident. I understand that combat will test me in ways that training cannot fully simulate, but I also understand that the Rangers' mission is too important to entrust to anyone who isn't completely committed to excellence. I am that committed, sir. I've earned the right to prove it. General Steele turned back to face her, his decision crystallizing. Chen possessed not just the technical skills required for elite military service, but the emotional resilience and moral foundation that distinguish truly exceptional soldiers from merely competent ones. Lieutenant Chen, I'm going to ask you to participate in a special evaluation exercise. It's not standard protocol, but your case is unusual enough to warrant unconventional assessment methods. Whatever you think is appropriate, sir. This exercise will push you beyond anything you've experienced in training. It will test not just your individual capabilities, but your ability to lead others through extreme scenarios. There will be no safety nets, no predetermined outcomes, and no second chances if you make critical errors. Chen's eyes lit up with anticipation rather than concern. When do we begin, sir? Tomorrow at 0500. Report to Training Area Delta with full field gear. You'll be briefed on the specific parameters then. Yes, sir. Will I be leading a team? You'll be leading multiple teams, Lieutenant. The scenario will require you to coordinate with different units, each with their own capabilities and limitations. Some of the soldiers under your temporary command will have more combat experience than you do. Some will outrank you in normal circumstances. Your job will be to earn their respect and accomplish objectives that have been designed to seem impossible. For the first time since entering his office, Chen showed a hint of excitement. Sir, may I ask what success looks like in this evaluation? General Steele allowed himself a slight smile. Success, Lieutenant, looks like proving that every extraordinary claim in your record understates your actual capabilities. Success looks like demonstrating that the Army's faith in you is justified. And if I fail? Failure means returning to conventional assignments and waiting for another opportunity to prove yourself. But based on our conversation today, I don't think failure is something you're familiar with. Chen saluted crisply. Thank you for this opportunity, sir. I won't disappoint you. Lieutenant, the general called as she turned toward the door. One final piece of advice. Tomorrow's exercise isn't just about demonstrating your abilities. It's about showing that you can maintain your humanity and moral compass when everything around you is chaos. Don't lose sight of why you wanted to serve in the first place. Understood, sir. I'll remember that leadership is a privilege, not a right. As Chen left his office, General Steele returned to his desk and opened her file one final time. Tomorrow's evaluation would either confirm his growing conviction that she represented the future of military leadership, or reveal that even the most promising soldiers could be overwhelmed by sufficiently challenging circumstances. Either way, he would have his answer about whether Lieutenant Sarah Chen was ready to join the ranks of America's elite warriors. The sun was setting over Fort Braxton as he made his final notes in her evaluation file. In less than 12 hours, one of the most unusual assessments in the base's history would begin. Chen claimed she'd never found her breaking point. Tomorrow, he would discover whether that confidence was justified, or whether she was about to learn that everyone, no matter how capable, eventually encountered challenges that exceeded their abilities. But something told me that Chen was different. Her combination of natural talent, hard-earned resilience, and unwavering commitment to excellence suggested that tomorrow's test might reveal not her limitations, but the Army's need to redesign its expectations of what a single soldier could accomplish.
The pre-dawn darkness at Fort Braxton was broken only by scattered floodlights illuminating Training Area Delta. Lieutenant Sarah Chen arrived precisely at 0500, her equipment checked and rechecked according to protocols she'd memorized years ago. What she found waiting for her, however, was unlike any training scenario she'd encountered. 3 separate military units stood in distinct formations across the expansive training ground. To her left, a squad of seasoned rangers, their faces weathered by multiple deployments and their equipment bearing the subtle modifications that marked true combat veterans. In the center, a team of fresh recruits from basic training, their nervous energy palpable in the morning chill. To her right, a group of military engineers and communications specialists, technical experts whose combat experience was limited, but whose specialized skills were essential for complex operations. General Steele emerged from a command vehicle, accompanied by several senior officers Chen didn't recognize. Their presence immediately elevated the significance of whatever was about to unfold. Lieutenant Chen, the general announced, his voice carrying across the training area. Today's exercise is designated Operation Crucible. Your mission parameters are as follows. Hostile forces have captured a strategic research facility 15 miles north of here. The facility contains classified technology that cannot be allowed to fall into enemy hands. Standard rescue protocols have failed, and conventional assault options have been deemed too risky. He gestured toward a detailed terrain model that had been set up on a table nearby. Intelligence indicates that 12 civilian researchers are being held hostage inside the facility, along with critical data that must be recovered intact. The enemy force is estimated at 40 combatants, well-trained and heavily armed. They've had 6 hours to establish defensive positions and are expecting rescue attempts. Chen studied the model, noting the facility's elevated position, limited approach routes, and multiple defensive advantages. It was exactly the kind of scenario that military textbooks classified as high casualty, low success probability. Your resources, the general continued, consist of the 3 teams you see here. The Rangers have combat experience but are operating with reduced numbers, only 8 soldiers instead of their usual 12. The recruits have completed basic training but have never participated in live-fire exercises. The technical team has specialized skills but limited combat training. He paused, ensuring she understood the complexity of her situation. You have 4 hours to plan, prepare, and execute this mission. Success means recovering all hostages alive, securing the classified data, and neutralizing the hostile force while sustaining minimal friendly casualties. Sir, Chen responded, what are the specific constraints on engagement rules and acceptable risk levels?
Real-world constraints, Lieutenant. You're authorized to use whatever tactics you deem necessary, but remember that dead hostages represent mission failure and excessive friendly casualties will be viewed as poor leadership. One of the senior rangers, a sergeant first class with 3 combat tours visible on his uniform, stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, this scenario has been attempted by experienced officers multiple times. The best previous result was 60% hostage survival and 30% friendly casualties. Most attempts resulted in complete mission failure. Chen nodded acknowledgement. Sergeant, I appreciate that information. Can you tell me what approaches have been tried previously? Standard assault patterns, ma'am. Direct frontal assault, flanking maneuvers, diversionary tactics, and stealth infiltration. The facility's design and the enemy's preparation time make all conventional approaches extremely difficult. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Chen walked slowly around the terrain model, her mind processing multiple variables simultaneously. The previous failures weren't due to poor execution. They were the predictable result of approaching an asymmetric problem with symmetric solutions. The facility's defenses were designed to counter conventional military tactics, which meant success required unconventional thinking. I need to speak with team leaders from each unit, she announced. Sergeant Morrison from the Rangers, Corporal Davis from the recruits, and Specialist Rodriguez from the technical team. Everyone else conduct equipment checks and prepare for detailed briefings in 30 minutes. As the 3 team leaders approached, Chen began formulating a plan that would utilize each unit's strengths while compensating for their individual limitations. Gentlemen, I need honest assessments of your team's capabilities. Sergeant Morrison, what can your Rangers definitely accomplish and what are your operational limitations with reduced numbers? Morrison's response was crisp and professional. Ma'am, we can handle direct combat effectively, conduct stealth reconnaissance, and provide precise fire support. Our limitation is that we don't have enough personnel for multiple simultaneous objectives. We excel at focused operations, but can't be in 3 places at once. Corporal Davis, what about your recruits? The young corporal looked nervous but answered confidently. Ma'am, they're well-trained in basic tactics and extremely motivated, but they lack combat experience. They follow orders excellently and have strong physical conditioning, but they might struggle with split-second decision-making under fire. Specialist Rodriguez? Lieutenant, my team can handle electronic warfare, communications disruption, structural analysis, and technical infiltration. We can disable security systems, establish secure communications, and handle explosive ordnance. Our weakness is limited combat training. We can defend ourselves, but shouldn't be relied upon for assault operations. Chen nodded, her plan beginning to crystallize. Here's what we're going to do, and I need everyone to understand that this approach requires absolute precision and complete trust between teams. She pointed to specific locations on the terrain model. The previous attempts failed because they treated this as a combat problem requiring combat solutions. But this is actually an engineering problem disguised as a combat scenario. We're going to approach it as such. The 3 team leaders exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about her direction. Specialist Rodriguez, your team is going to conduct the primary infiltration, not to engage the enemy, but to systematically disable their defensive advantages. Can your people cut power to specific sections of the facility without triggering backup systems? Yes, ma'am, if we can access the main electrical junction, we can create selective blackouts that would appear to be equipment malfunctions rather than sabotage. Excellent. Corporal Davis, your recruits are going to create the world's most convincing diversionary operation. Not a real attack, a simulation of a failed attack that makes the enemy believe they've successfully repelled a rescue attempt. Davis looked confused. Ma'am, how does a fake failed attack help us? Chen smiled. Because it makes them overconfident and causes them to reallocate their defensive positions. Sergeant Morrison, while the enemy is congratulating themselves on defeating the rescue attempt, your Rangers are going to conduct the actual hostage extraction through routes they'll no longer be watching. She traced paths on the model with her finger. The technical team disables their advantages, the recruits manipulate their attention, and the Rangers exploit the openings we create. But the key is that all 3 operations must be coordinated to the second, and every team must be prepared to adapt if circumstances change. Morrison studied the plan carefully. Ma'am, this is certainly unconventional. What if the diversionary operation goes wrong and becomes a real engagement? Then we adapt, Chen replied without hesitation. But that's why we're going to rehearse every phase multiple times and establish clear communication protocols. Everyone needs to understand not just their own role, but how their actions affect the other team's success. Over the next 2 hours, Chen drilled the 3 teams through increasingly complex rehearsals. She identified potential failure points, developed contingency plans, and ensured that every soldier understood both the tactical objectives and the underlying strategic logic. What impressed the watching senior officers was not just the sophistication of her plan, but the way she communicated with each team. She spoke to the Rangers in terms of tactical precision, to the recruits using clear, encouraging instruction, and to the technical specialists using engineering problem-solving language. Each group received the same information, but presented in ways that matched their training and experience levels. Time check, she called out. We execute in 30 minutes. Final equipment checks, communications tests, and synchronization. Remember, success depends on teamwork, not individual heroics.
At precisely 1100 hours, Operation Crucible began. From his observation post 2 miles away, General Steele watched through high-powered optics as Chen's unconventional plan unfolded with clockwork precision. Phase 1 commenced with Specialist Rodriguez's technical team approaching the facility from the least defended angle. Using advanced electronic equipment, they began systematically mapping the enemy's communication networks and defensive systems. To external observers, they appeared to be conducting routine reconnaissance, but they were actually laying the groundwork for everything that would follow. Control, this is Tech Lead. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the command frequency. We have eyes on primary infrastructure, beginning selective systems analysis. Chen's voice responded immediately. Understood, Tech Lead. Report when ready for Phase 2. Meanwhile, Corporal Davis positioned his recruits in a staging area that was deliberately visible to enemy observation posts. The recruits' nervous energy, which might have been a liability in conventional operations, became an asset in selling the authenticity of their preparation for a frontal assault. Ma'am, Davis reported, the enemy has definitely spotted us. We're observing increased activity on their defensive positions. Perfect, Corporal. Continue preparations, but maintain current position until my signal. Sergeant Morrison's Rangers had seemingly vanished entirely. Their approach route took them through terrain that experienced soldiers would recognize as nearly impossible to traverse quietly, which was exactly why the enemy wasn't watching it closely. Morrison was leading his team on a path that required advanced mountaineering skills and complete noise discipline, but would ultimately position them within striking distance of the hostage location. Ranger Lead to Control. We're in position, but movement to final approach will require 30 minutes of exposed terrain. Confirm when diversion begins. Chen monitored all 3 teams simultaneously, while analyzing real-time intelligence from drone surveillance. The enemy's defensive posture was evolving exactly as she'd predicted. They were concentrating forces to repel the obvious threat, while leaving their flanks relatively unprotected. Tech Lead, status report. Control, we have identified their backup power systems and communication relays. We can create selective blackouts in sectors 3 and 7, which should disable their motion sensors and night vision equipment in the target areas. However, they'll know something is wrong within approximately 10 minutes. Understood. Ranger Lead, how quickly can you execute once you have darkness? Ma'am, if we have clear approaches, we can reach the hostage location in under 5 minutes and conduct extraction in another 3 minutes, but we'll need the diversion to be active during our entire window. Chen calculated timing and contingencies rapidly. The operation's success hinged on synchronizing 3 complex sequences with minimal margin for error. All teams, prepare for execution. Tech Lead, initiate systems disruption in 60 seconds. Diversion team, begin your assault simulation 90 seconds after systems go dark. Ranger Lead, commence final approach when diversion draws their attention. Control, this is Tech Lead. We're observing unusual activity from enemy technical personnel. They appear to be conducting their own systems checks. If they're more technically sophisticated than intelligence indicated, our window might be shorter than planned. This was exactly the kind of
adaptive challenge that separated exceptional leaders from merely competent ones. Chen processed the new information and adjusted her timeline without hesitation. New parameters, all teams. Tech lead, can you create a cascading failure that appears to be equipment malfunction rather than sabotage? Affirmative control, but it would require us to disable systems in sequence rather than simultaneously. The effect would be longer lasting but take more time to implement. Negative. We maintain original timeline. If they detect sabotage, we adapt to direct confrontation, but we don't abandon the plan unless circumstances force us to. The next few minutes demonstrated why Chen's instructors had noted her unusual composure under pressure. As the operation unfolded, multiple small complications arose: equipment malfunctions, communication difficulties, and enemy movements that deviated from predicted patterns. Each challenge required immediate decisions that affected the entire mission's success probability. Systems disruption commencing now, Rodriguez reported. Across the facility, carefully selected electrical systems began failing in ways that appeared random but were actually precisely orchestrated. Emergency lighting activated in some areas while others went completely dark. Communication equipment experienced intermittent failures that seemed like technical problems rather than hostile action. Diversion team, execute now. Corporal Davis led his recruits in a carefully choreographed assault that involved maximum noise and visibility while maintaining actual safety. They fired blank ammunition, used smoke grenades, and maneuvered in ways that appeared aggressive but kept them out of real danger. To the enemy, it looked like an inexperienced but determined rescue attempt. The enemy's defenders responded exactly as Chen had anticipated, redirecting personnel and firepower towards the obvious threat. Radio intercepts confirmed that enemy commanders were congratulating themselves on the apparent ease with which they were repelling the rescue attempt. Ranger lead, you have clear approaches to sectors 3 and 7. Enemy attention is focused on the diversion. Understood, Control. Beginning final approach now. The Rangers moved into the darkened sections of the facility like ghosts. Their years of combat experience showed as they navigated complex terrain and structural obstacles without triggering the few remaining sensors. Each Ranger knew not just his own role, but every aspect of the extraction plan, allowing them to adapt to obstacles without waiting for orders. Control, this is Ranger Lead. We have visual confirmation of hostage location. 12 civilians present and accounted for. Enemy presence is lighter than expected. They've moved most personnel to counter the diversion. Outstanding, Ranger Lead. Commence extraction. What happened next would later be studied in military academies as a textbook example of precision teamwork under pressure. The Rangers entered the hostage area using breaching techniques that minimized noise and structural damage. They quickly secured the 12 researchers, confirmed the location of the classified data, and prepared for immediate evacuation. Control, packages secured, data recovered, request extraction route. But it was at this moment that Chen's plan faced its greatest test. Enemy technical personnel had identified the pattern in their systems failures and were attempting to restore power and communication. The diversionary operation had been successful, but the enemy were beginning to realize they'd been deceived. All teams, be advised that enemy is adapting to our operations. Tech lead, can you maintain systems disruption for another 5 minutes? Negative, Control. They're implementing manual overrides. We'll have partial power restoration in approximately 3 minutes. Chen faced the critical decision that would determine the operation's outcome. She could order immediate evacuation, accepting higher risk but maintaining the element of surprise, or she could adapt the plan to account for the enemy's countermeasures, accepting different risks but potentially achieving better results. Ranger lead. Enemy will have partial defensive systems restored in 3 minutes. Can you complete extraction before then? Ma'am, we can get the hostages out, but the data is in a separate location. Reaching it and returning would take at least 6 minutes. This was the moment every military leader dreads, being forced to choose between completing the primary mission and ensuring the safety of personnel. Chen's response would reveal whether her confidence was justified or whether she would crumble under the weight of impossible decisions.
Ranger lead, Chen's voice cut through the radio chatter with absolute clarity.
Execute the data recovery. Diversion team, intensify your simulation to buy us more time. Tech lead, I need you to create one more system failure, something dramatic enough to convince them their problems are equipment-based, not sabotage-based. Her decision demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that separated truly exceptional officers from their peers. Rather than accepting the choice between hostages and data, she was restructuring the entire operation to achieve both objectives. Control, this is tech lead. I can overload their main transformer, which would cause facility-wide power loss, and probably convince them it's an equipment failure. But once we do that, we can't restore anything. It's a one-way commitment. Understood. How long until you can execute? 30 seconds, ma'am. Chen's mind calculated rapidly. Complete power loss would give the Rangers the darkness they needed for data recovery, but it would also eliminate her ability to monitor the overall situation. She would be commanding blind, relying entirely on her team's training and initiative. All teams, prepare for total facility blackout in 30 seconds. Ranger lead, you'll have complete darkness for data recovery but no electronic surveillance support. Diversion team, when the power fails, shift to phase 3. Simulate regrouping for a second assault while actually preparing for real covering fire if needed. Tech lead, after you trigger the blackout, relocate to overwatch position and prepare to provide emergency support. Ma'am, Sergeant Morrison's voice carried a note of concern. Without power, their emergency protocols might include executing hostages. It was a legitimate tactical concern that most officers would have spent precious time debating. Chen's response was immediate and decisive. Negative, Ranger lead. Intelligence assessment indicates they need the hostages alive for negotiation leverage. Emergency protocols will focus on defensive positions and communication with their command structure. You have a clear window, but it closes fast. Understood, Control. Ready to execute. Tech lead, initiate blackout now. The transformation was instantaneous and dramatic. The entire research facility plunged into complete darkness as every electrical system shut down simultaneously. Emergency generators failed to activate because Rodriguez's team had disabled the automatic switching systems. From the perspective of everyone inside the facility, it appeared that their aging infrastructure had finally suffered catastrophic failure. Enemy radio chatter, intercepted by Chen's communications equipment, confirmed that their commanders initially attributed the blackout to equipment failure rather than hostile action. Critical minutes passed as they attempted to restore power manually and re-establish communications with their defensive positions. Ranger lead, you have maximum darkness. Execute data recovery now. Morrison's team moved through the facility with supernatural quiet, their night vision equipment giving them overwhelming advantage in the complete darkness. They reached the data storage location without encountering resistance, finding that most enemy personnel were either defending against the supposed frontal assault or attempting to restore facility power. Control, we have reached the data storage area, beginning download procedures now. Time estimate? 4 minutes for complete data transfer, ma'am. Chen monitored her watch while analyzing radio intercepts from enemy communications. Their initial confusion was giving way to suspicion, and she could hear orders being issued to conduct systematic searches of the facility. Her window was closing rapidly. Diversion team, enemy is beginning to redeploy personnel for internal searches. Increase the intensity of your simulation. Make them believe you're preparing for a major second assault. Corporal Davis's recruits responded with enthusiasm, creating enough noise and apparent activity to suggest a much larger force preparing for comprehensive attack. Their blank ammunition and smoke grenades provided impressive audio-visual effects that kept enemy attention focused externally rather than on their internal security. Control, this is diversion lead. We can maintain current activity levels for another 10 minutes, but after that our ammunition supplies will be noticeably depleted. Understood. Ranger lead status. 60% complete on data transfer. We're also finding additional classified materials that weren't in the intelligence briefing. Do you want us to prioritize speed or completeness? This was another critical decision point. Taking additional time could provide valuable intelligence, but increased risk to both the Rangers and the hostages. Chen's response reflected the kind of strategic thinking that her instructors had noted throughout her training. Ranger lead, Secure everything that can be transferred in your original timeline. Document the location of additional materials, but don't extend your exposure time. We can plan follow-up operations if necessary. Understood, Control. Completing transfer now. But as Chen monitored the situation, she realized that her carefully orchestrated plan faced an unexpected complication. Enemy technical personnel were more skilled than intelligence had indicated, and they were beginning to restore partial power to critical systems. Within minutes, they would have enough functionality to detect the Rangers' presence and threaten the hostages. Tech Lead, enemies restoring power faster than anticipated. Can you create additional delays? Negative, Control. I've used all available options without exposing our position. They'll have partial systems restored in approximately 3 minutes. Chen faced a decision that would test every aspect of her leadership training. She could order immediate extraction, accepting incomplete mission success, but ensuring personnel safety. She could maintain current operations, risking exposure but potentially achieving complete objectives. Or she could implement a contingency plan that nobody had discussed, but that her tactical instincts suggested might work. All teams implement Contingency Omega. There was a brief pause on all radio frequencies. Contingency Omega wasn't an official protocol. It was Chen's improvised designation for a plan that existed only in her mind, but that she was confident her teams could execute based on their training and demonstrated capabilities. Control, please clarify Contingency Omega, Morrison requested. Ranger Lead, complete your current operation and prepare for immediate extraction via alternate route Bravo. Tech Lead, relocate to position Charlie and prepare to provide technical support for communication disruption. Diversion Team, shift to actual covering fire protocol on my signal. Each team leader acknowledged the orders, despite not fully understanding the overall strategy. Their willingness to trust Chen's judgment in the middle of a complex operation demonstrated the kind of leadership credibility that couldn't be taught in classrooms or measured by standardized tests. Ranger Lead, data transfer complete. We have hostages and intelligence package ready for extraction. Outstanding. Begin movement to alternate extraction point. Tech Lead, initiate communication jamming to prevent enemy coordination during withdrawal. Rodriguez's team had positioned themselves to monitor and disrupt enemy communications without being detected. As the Rangers began their extraction with hostages and classified data, Rodriguez began selective jamming that prevented enemy units from coordinating their response effectively. Control, enemy communications are degraded. They're having difficulty coordinating searches or responding to reports of unusual activity. The next 10 minutes demonstrated why Chen's unconventional approach had succeeded where traditional methods had failed. Instead of fighting the enemy's strengths directly, she had systematically eliminated their advantages while maximizing her own team's capabilities. The Rangers extracted all hostages and recovered the classified data without firing a single shot. The recruits had provided perfect diversionary support without sustaining any casualties. The technical team had neutralized enemy advantages without exposing themselves to direct confrontation. All teams, rally at extraction point, Delta. Mission accomplished. As the 3 teams regrouped at the predetermined location, Chen conducted immediate after-action assessment. All 12 hostages were unharmed. The classified data had been recovered completely. Enemy casualties were 0, since no direct engagement had occurred. Friendly casualties were 0. The operation had achieved every objective while exceeding all success criteria. Control. This is Ranger Lead. All personnel accounted for, all objectives accomplished. Hostages report no injuries or mistreatment during captivity. General Steele's voice crackled over the command frequency. All teams, cease exercise. Return to base for debriefing. Outstanding work, everyone. But as the teams prepared to return to Fort Braxton, Chen realized that the real test hadn't been the tactical challenge. It had been proving that exceptional results were possible when conventional limitations were rejected in favor of creative problem-solving and absolute trust between team members. The ride back to base was quiet, each soldier processing what they had experienced. The Rangers, despite their extensive combat experience, acknowledged that they had learned new approaches to tactical problems. The recruits had gained confidence from contributing meaningfully to a complex operation. The technical specialists had seen how their skills could be integrated into combat operations in ways they had never considered. For Chen, the operation had confirmed something she had always believed but never fully tested, that leadership wasn't about having all the answers, but about creating conditions where other people could exceed their own expectations of what was possible.
The debriefing room at Fort Braxton buzzed with an energy that senior officers rarely witnessed. General Steele sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by the evaluation team he'd assembled, colonels, majors, and subject matter experts who had observed Operation Crucible from multiple vantage points. The atmosphere was electric with the kind of anticipation that followed truly extraordinary events. Lieutenant Sarah Chen entered the room with the same composed confidence she'd displayed throughout the operation. Her uniform showed signs of the day's activities, but her bearing remained impeccable. She took her assigned seat across from General Steele and waited for the formal assessment to begin. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general began, "we've just witnessed something unprecedented in the 15-year history of this evaluation program. Operation Crucible was designed to test leadership, tactical thinking, and performance under pressure. Lieutenant Chen's execution exceeded every metric we use to measure success." He gestured toward a wall-mounted screen displaying operational statistics. 0 friendly casualties, 0 hostage casualties, 100% mission completion rate, 0 enemy casualties, which demonstrates remarkable fire discipline and tactical sophistication, and perhaps most importantly, complete integration of 3 disparate military units into a cohesive operational force. Colonel Martinez, the base's senior training officer, leaned forward. "General, I've been running tactical evaluations for 8 years. I've never seen a junior officer coordinate multiple teams with that level of precision while adapting to real-time complications." The communications intercepts show that Lieutenant Chen made 17 critical tactical adjustments during the operation, each one improving the mission's success probability. Chen remained silent, waiting for direct questions, but her attentiveness showed she was processing every comment and criticism. "Lieutenant," General Steele addressed her directly, "walk us through your decision-making process. Specifically, how did you develop your initial strategy, and how did you maintain operational control when circumstances deviated from your plan?" Chen's response was immediate and detailed. "Sir, the initial strategy was based on recognizing that previous attempts had failed because they treated this as a military problem requiring military solutions. But the scenario's constraints suggested it was actually a systems problem disguised as a combat operation." She stood and moved to the tactical display, pointing to specific locations as she explained her reasoning. "The enemy's advantages were primarily technological and positional. Rather than trying to overcome those advantages through superior firepower or numbers, I focused on systematically eliminating them. The technical team disabled their technological edge, the diversionary operation manipulated their positional advantage, and the Rangers exploited the gaps we created. And when the enemy began adapting to your countermeasures, that's when the operation became a test of our team's ability to improvise within a coherent framework, sir. Each team understood not just their specific role, but the overall strategic objective and how their actions affected other teams' success. When I called for contingency Omega, I was confident they could execute because we'd built that flexibility into our preparation." Colonel Martinez interjected. "Lieutenant, there was no contingency Omega in any of your briefing materials. You improvised that designation during the operation." Chen smiled slightly. "Yes, sir, but by that point, all 3 teams had demonstrated they could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their core objectives. Contingency Omega wasn't a specific plan, it was a signal that we were moving to full adaptive mode, where each team leader would make tactical decisions based on their understanding of the overall strategy." The evaluation panel exchanged glances. Most military operations relied on detailed, predetermined plans with limited flexibility. Chen had essentially conducted a jazz improvisation where each participant understood the underlying structure well enough to create spontaneous variations that enhanced rather than disrupted the overall performance. "Lieutenant," General Steele continued, "several observers noted that your teams displayed unusual cohesion for units that had never worked together before. How did you achieve that level of integration in such a short time?"
Sir, I spent the first 2 hours of preparation time not just explaining tactical procedures, but helping each team understand why their specific capabilities were essential to the operation's success. The Rangers needed to know that their role wasn't just extraction. They were the precision element that would justify all the risk the other teams were taking. The recruits needed to understand that their diversionary operation wasn't busy work. It was the key to creating the tactical opportunity for success. The technical team needed to see that their system's disruption wasn't support activity, it was the foundation that made everything else possible. She paused, choosing her words carefully. When people understand that their contribution is essential rather than optional, they perform at levels that exceed their normal capabilities. Each team member became personally invested in the overall mission success, not just their individual task completion. Major Thompson, the base psychologist who specialized in leadership assessment, asked, "How did you maintain your own composure when you were essentially commanding blind during the final phase of the operation?" Ma'am, by that point, the operation had demonstrated that the teams could be trusted to execute effectively with minimal supervision. My job wasn't to micromanage every decision, it was to provide strategic guidance and ensure that all three operations remained synchronized. She returned to her seat, her expression growing more serious. But I also understood that if the operation failed, the responsibility would be entirely mine. That level of accountability actually made decision-making easier, not harder. When you know that failure is not acceptable, you focus completely on identifying and implementing solutions rather than worrying about potential consequences. The room fell silent as the evaluation panel processed her response. Most young officers struggled with command responsibility and the weight of making decisions that affected others' lives. Chen spoke about it as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Lieutenant Chen," General Steele said, his voice carrying a note of formality that had not been present earlier, "this evaluation panel has reviewed your performance during Operation Crucible. We've also analyzed the detailed reports from all three team leaders who served under your command. Would you like to hear their assessments?" "Yes, sir." General Steele opened a file and began reading. Sergeant Morrison, Rangers. Lieutenant Chen demonstrated tactical thinking that exceeded anything I've encountered in 12 years of military service. She understood our capabilities better than officers who have worked with us for months, and she employed our skills in ways that maximized effectiveness while minimizing risk. I would follow her into combat without hesitation. He turned to the next page. Corporal Davis, recruits. Ma'am made us feel like we were essential to the mission's success, not just bodies filling space. She explained everything in ways that made sense, trusted us to execute properly, and gave us confidence to perform at our best. My soldiers said it was the first time they felt like real soldiers instead of trainees. The final assessment was equally glowing. Specialist Rodriguez, technical team. Lieutenant Chen integrated our capabilities into the tactical plan better than any officer we've worked with. She understood what we could and couldn't do, and she structured the operation to maximize our strengths while protecting us from exposure we couldn't handle. Her technical knowledge was impressive, but her leadership was exceptional.
Chen listened to the assessments without visible emotion, but the slight straightening of her posture suggested she was deeply moved by her team's confidence in her leadership. "Lieutenant," the general continued, "these reports are remarkable not just for their enthusiasm, but for their consistency. 3 different teams with different experiences and different perspectives all reached the same conclusion. You exceeded their expectations of what military leadership could accomplish."
Colonel Martinez pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. "Lieutenant Chen, what we're about to discuss is classified and will remain within this room. Operation Crucible wasn't just a training exercise, it was a practical test of tactical concepts that we're considering for implementation in actual special operations." Chen's expression sharpened with interest. The revelation that her test had real-world implications added significant weight to everything that had occurred. "The scenario you face today was based on an actual intelligence assessment of a facility that hostile forces might attempt to capture," the general explained. Your tactical approach and its success rate have immediate relevance to current operational planning. He gestured toward a map display that showed terrain features Chen recognized from the training exercise. What you accomplished today, integrating diverse military units, achieving objectives with zero casualties, and adapting to real-time complications, represents exactly the kind of capability that modern military operations require. Major Thompson leaned forward. Lieutenant, we need to understand not just what you did, but how you developed the ability to do it. Your approach to multi-team coordination wasn't taught in any leadership course we're aware of. Where did these concepts come from? Chen considered the question carefully. Ma'am, I think it came from growing up in a family where everyone had different strengths, but everyone's contribution was essential for survival. My parents worked different jobs with different skills. My brother and I had different abilities, but our family succeeded when everyone's capabilities were used effectively. She paused, organizing her thoughts. Military units often operate like collections of individuals rather than integrated teams, but families, especially families facing difficult circumstances, succeed because each member understands how their actions affect everyone else's outcomes. I applied family dynamics to military operations. The evaluation panel exchanged glances. Military leadership doctrine emphasized individual excellence, clear hierarchies, and standardized procedures. Chen was describing an entirely different approach based on collective responsibility and adaptive collaboration. Can you elaborate on how family dynamics translate to military operations? Colonel Martinez asked. Sir, in families facing adversity, leadership isn't about authority. It's about coordination. The person who makes decisions in any given situation is the one with the most relevant knowledge and skills, not necessarily the one with the highest rank. Everyone trusts everyone else to do their part because failure affects the entire family. She stood and moved to the whiteboard, beginning to diagram her concepts. In today's operation, I coordinated overall strategy, but Sergeant Morrison made tactical decisions for the Rangers, Corporal Davis determined specific diversionary tactics, and Specialist Rodriguez chose the technical approaches that would be most effective. Each team leader had authority within their area of expertise, but everyone understood how their decisions affected the overall mission. That's remarkably sophisticated organizational theory for a lieutenant, Major Thompson observed. Most officers your rank focus on executing orders rather than designing command structures. Ma'am, I've been thinking about leadership and team dynamics since I was 16 and had to coordinate my family's response to my father's injury. Military training gave me tactical knowledge and operational skills, but my understanding of how people work together effectively came from years of practical experience. General Steele made notes as Chen continued her explanation. Her approach wasn't just unconventional. It represented a fundamental reimagining of how military units could operate. Traditional command structures were designed for clarity and predictability. Chen had created something more flexible and potentially more effective. Lieutenant, what you're describing sounds like it could work with experienced personnel, but how would this approach function with soldiers who haven't developed the judgment to make independent tactical decisions? Sir, that's why the preparation phase was so important. I didn't just give orders. I explained the reasoning behind every decision so that each team member understood the strategic logic. When people understand why they're doing something and how it fits into the larger objective, they make better decisions even in situations they haven't encountered before. She turned back to the evaluation panel. The recruits today performed exceptionally well, not because they were experienced, but because they understood exactly what we were trying to accomplish and why their role was essential. Understanding creates confidence, and confidence enables performance. Colonel Martinez reviewed his notes. Lieutenant, we've been developing a new training program for special operations leadership. Based on what we observed today, we'd like you to participate in designing the curriculum. Your approaches could revolutionize how we prepare officers for complex multi-unit operations. Before Chen could respond, General Steele raised his hand. Colonel, that's premature. We haven't completed our evaluation yet.
The room grew quiet as everyone recognized that, despite the overwhelmingly positive assessments, Chen's ultimate assignment hadn't been determined. Lieutenant Chen, Operation Crucible was designed to test your readiness for assignment to elite military units. However, your performance today has raised questions that go beyond simple readiness assessment. Chen waited silently, her expression neutral but attentive. The question we're facing isn't whether you're qualified for elite assignment. Your performance today answered that definitively. The question is whether traditional elite assignments would utilize your capabilities effectively, or whether you represent something entirely new that requires different approaches. He opened another file, this one marked with security classifications that Chen couldn't read from her position. The Pentagon has been developing concepts for next-generation military operations, small, highly skilled teams capable of achieving strategic objectives through precision and adaptability rather than overwhelming force. What you demonstrated today represents exactly the kind of leadership capability these operations would require. Sir, are you offering me a specific assignment? I'm offering you a choice, Lieutenant. You can accept immediate promotion to captain and assignment to the 75th Rangers, which was the original plan. You would serve with distinction and have an excellent military career following conventional advancement paths. He paused, studying her face. Or you can accept assignment to a classified program, where you would help develop and test new operational concepts. The work would be challenging, often experimental, and would require you to essentially invent new approaches to military leadership as you go. Success could revolutionize how the military conducts special operations. Failure could end your career. The evaluation panel waited silently as Chen considered options that would shape not just her future, but potentially the future of military operations. Sir, may I ask about the scope and timeline of the classified program? 2-year assignment, initially. You would work with a small team of officers and specialists to develop and test tactical concepts like what you use today. If successful, the program could expand and you would likely be offered leadership roles in implementing new operational doctrines across multiple military branches. Chen's expression remained thoughtful, and if unsuccessful, you would return to conventional assignments, but with a record that might limit your advancement opportunities. The military doesn't always reward officers who attempt innovative approaches that don't work out. It was the kind of career decision that most officers would spend weeks considering. Chen's response was immediate. Sir, I'm interested in the classified program, but I have 2 conditions. The directness of her response surprised everyone in the room. Junior officers typically didn't negotiate with senior commanders, especially regarding classified assignments. What conditions, Lieutenant?
First, I want the opportunity to work with the same types of diverse teams we use today: experienced specialists, developing soldiers, and technical experts. If we're developing new operational concepts, they should be tested with the full range of personnel the military actually deploys. General Steele nodded approvingly. That's practical and sensible. Second condition. I want assurance that innovative approaches that don't succeed won't be held against the soldiers who help test them. If I'm going to ask people to trust experimental tactics, they need to know that their careers won't suffer if the experiments don't work out. The evaluation panel exchanged glances. Chen's conditions revealed something important about her character. She was willing to take personal risks to advance military capabilities, but only if she could protect the people who would serve under her command. Lieutenant, those are reasonable conditions, and I can assure you that personnel assigned to the program would receive career protection regardless of experimental outcomes. Chen stood and saluted crisply. Then I accept assignment to the classified program, sir. As she prepared to leave the briefing room, Colonel Martinez called out, Lieutenant, one final question. What made you confident that today's approach would work? Most officers would have been concerned about attempting such unconventional tactics during an evaluation that could determine their entire career. Chen paused at the door, considering her response. Sir, I wasn't confident it would work. I was confident that if it failed, it would fail in ways that taught us something valuable about the limitations of conventional approaches. Either way, we would learn something that made the military more effective. She met the eyes of each evaluation panel member.
The biggest risk isn't trying new approaches and failing. The biggest risk is continuing to use approaches that work adequately when dramatically better approaches might be possible. After Chen left the room, the evaluation panel sat in silence for several minutes, processing what they had witnessed. "Gentlemen," General Steele finally said, "I've been evaluating military personnel for 23 years. Lieutenant Chen represents something I've never encountered before. Not just exceptional individual capability, but the ability to create exceptional collective performance from ordinary resources." Colonel Martinez reviewed his extensive notes. "Sir, her test scores and individual achievements were impressive, but what happened today goes beyond personal excellence. She took 3 separate military units and turned them into something that functioned like a single, highly coordinated organism. And she did it in less than 4 hours," Major Thompson added. "Most team-building exercises require weeks to achieve the kind of integration we observed today." General Steele stood and walked to the window, looking out over the training grounds where hundreds of soldiers continued their daily preparation. "What concerns me, in the best possible way, is that Chen's approach might reveal fundamental flaws in how we currently train and deploy military personnel." He turned back to the panel. "If a lieutenant can achieve these results by applying family dynamics and systems thinking to military operations, what does that say about our existing leadership development programs?" The question hung in the air as each officer contemplated the implications. Military doctrine had evolved over centuries, refined through countless conflicts and endless study. The idea that a young lieutenant might have insights that could revolutionize established practices was both exciting and unsettling. "Sir, I think we need to consider the possibility that Chen isn't just an exceptional individual officer. She might represent a completely different approach to military leadership that we haven't fully understood yet." "Explain." "Traditional military leadership is based on hierarchy, standardization, and predictable outcomes. Chen's approach seems based on adaptation, integration, and emergent solutions. Both can be effective, but they might be effective in different types of situations." Major Thompson nodded agreement. "The scenarios that modern military forces face, asymmetric warfare, urban operations, multinational coalitions, rapidly changing technological environments, might require exactly the kind of adaptive leadership that Chen demonstrated today." General Steele returned to his seat and opened Chen's personnel file one more time. "The Pentagon's classified program isn't just about developing new tactics. It's about preparing for types of conflicts that don't exist yet, situations where traditional approaches might be completely inadequate." He closed the file decisively. Chen's assignment to that program isn't just about utilizing her capabilities. It's about understanding whether her approaches can be taught to other officers and scaled across larger military operations. The evaluation panel spent the next hour documenting their observations and recommendations. Their report would become part of military leadership research, studied by strategists and trainers attempting to understand how exceptional performance could be systematically developed rather than accidentally discovered. But as they worked, each officer found themselves questioning assumptions about leadership, teamwork, and military effectiveness that they had never thought to examine before. Chen's performance had been impressive, but its implications were potentially revolutionary. 3 days later, Lieutenant Sarah Chen received orders assigning her to a classified program based at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The assignment came with immediate promotion to captain and a notation in her personnel file that her commanding officers had requested her specifically based on exceptional demonstrated capability in adaptive leadership and innovative tactical thinking. What the orders didn't mention was that her performance during Operation Crucible had been videotaped and analyzed by senior Pentagon officials, including several generals who were responsible for developing future military doctrine. Her tactical approaches were being studied by researchers at the Army War College, and her leadership techniques were being tested in advanced training programs across multiple military branches. Chen's challenge to show what she could do had produced results that exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. But more importantly, It had demonstrated that the question wasn't just what individual officers could accomplish. It was what became possible when exceptional leadership created conditions for collective excellence. The military had discovered not just an exceptional officer, but potentially a new model for how exceptional officers could be developed and deployed. Chen's story was just beginning, but its implications were already reshaping how the military thought about leadership, teamwork, and the future of warfare itself.
6 months after Operation Crucible, Captain Sarah Chen stood before a classroom of senior military officers at Fort Leavenworth, preparing to present the findings from the Pentagon's Classified Leadership Development Program. The audience included colonels, brigadier generals, and civilian defense officials who would determine whether her innovative approaches would be integrated into standard military doctrine or classified as interesting experiments that weren't ready for broader implementation. The program she'd been assigned to had exceeded every projected outcome. Over 6 months, Chen had developed and tested new operational concepts with 12 different military units, ranging from elite special forces to National Guard reserve units. The results had been consistently remarkable. Significant improvements in mission success rates, dramatic reductions in casualty rates, and enhanced cooperation between different military branches and allied forces. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chen began, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had impressed General Steele months earlier, "the question we've been investigating isn't whether individual excellence can produce exceptional military outcomes. We know it can. The question is whether exceptional outcomes can be produced systematically by developing collective excellence within ordinary military units." She activated a presentation display showing statistical comparisons between traditional operational approaches and the adaptive leadership methods she'd been testing. Over the past 6 months, we've conducted 47 separate operations using integrated team approaches similar to what was demonstrated during Operation Crucible. The results have suggested that these methods don't just work with exceptional personnel, they can enhance the performance of any military unit when applied systematically. Brigadier General Patterson, who supervised the Pentagon's Special Operations Development, raised his hand. "Captain Chen, your results are impressive, but how do we know they're replicable? Maybe your personal leadership skills are responsible for the improvements rather than the methods themselves." It was exactly the question Chen had expected, and she designed her research specifically to address it. "Sir, that's why we tested the approaches with 12 different unit commanders. I provided training and consultation, but actual operational leadership was conducted by the assigned unit commanders. 7 of the 12 were captains or majors with conventional leadership training. 5 were senior NCOs with extensive combat experience, but no formal leadership education." She switched to a new slide showing detailed performance metrics. All 12 units showed significant improvement over their baseline performance, regardless of their commander's experience level or leadership background. The methods enhanced existing capabilities rather than replacing them. Colonel Martinez, who had been following Chen's progress since Operation Crucible, leaned forward with interest. "What specific elements of your approach seem to be most important for success?" "Sir, 3 factors appear critical," Chen replied, moving to a whiteboard where she began diagramming organizational concepts. "First, tactical transparency, ensuring that every team member understands not just their individual role, but how their actions affect overall mission success. Second, adaptive authority, allowing decision-making to shift based on expertise and situation rather than rigid hierarchy. Third, collective accountability, creating conditions where individual success depends on team success." She turned back to the audience. "These aren't radical concepts individually, but combining them systematically creates military units that function more like high-performance research teams than traditional command structures." Brigadier General Patterson studied the data carefully. "Captain, what you're describing sounds like it could work in controlled training environments, but how would these approaches function in actual combat operations where communications are disrupted, personnel are injured, and tactical situations change rapidly?" Chen's response demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had impressed her superiors throughout her career.
Sir, that's exactly when these approaches become most valuable. Traditional command structures can break down when communications fail or leaders are incapacitated. But units trained in adaptive leadership continue functioning effectively because decision-making capability is distributed throughout the team rather than concentrated in single individuals. She switched to a video display showing excerpts from training exercises that simulated combat conditions with communications failures and leadership casualties. In these scenarios, traditionally trained units showed significant performance degradation when normal command structures were disrupted. Units trained in adaptive approaches maintained effectiveness because every team member understood the strategic objectives and could contribute to tactical decision-making. The audience watched footage of military units continuing complex operations despite losing their designated leaders and having their communications systems compromised. The units using Chen's approaches appeared to function almost seamlessly, while control groups using traditional methods struggled with coordination and decision-making. This is impressive, admitted Colonel Stevens from the Army War College, but it raises questions about discipline and control. Military effectiveness depends on soldiers following orders, not making independent decisions. Chen nodded respectfully. Sir, I understand that concern, and it's been central to our research. What we found is that soldiers who understand the strategic logic behind orders actually follow them more effectively and adapt them more appropriately when circumstances change. She displayed interview footage of soldiers who had participated in the training programs. These soldiers report higher confidence, better understanding of mission objectives, and stronger commitment to team success. Rather than undermining discipline, strategic transparency appears to enhance it by giving soldiers reasons to be disciplined rather than simply requiring obedience. The presentation continued for another hour, with Chen addressing detailed questions about training requirements, resource allocation, and implementation timelines. Her responses demonstrated not just mastery of the tactical concepts she'd developed, but deep understanding of the institutional and cultural changes that would be necessary for broader implementation. As the formal presentation concluded, General Patterson requested a private consultation. Captain Chen, what you've developed is remarkable, but implementing it across the military would require fundamental changes in how we train officers, organize units, and conduct operations. Are you prepared for that level of institutional change? Chen's response was immediate and thoughtful. Sir, I understand that change is challenging, especially in institutions with proud traditions and proven effectiveness, but I also understand that military threats are evolving rapidly, and our enemies are adapting their approaches continuously. If we don't evolve our own capabilities, we risk being unprepared for conflicts that require types of performance we haven't previously needed. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The approaches we've tested don't replace traditional military values, they extend them. Courage, honor, commitment, and excellence remain fundamental, but we're exploring how those values can be expressed through enhanced teamwork, adaptive thinking, and innovative problem solving. General Patterson made notes as she spoke. Captain, I'm going to recommend that your program be expanded and that you be assigned to develop implementation protocols for broader military adoption. This will likely require promotion to major and assignment to the Pentagon for 2 years of curriculum development and pilot program supervision. Sir, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'd like to request continued field assignment rather than staff position. The concepts we're developing need to be tested and refined through continued operational experience, not just theoretical analysis. It was an unusual request. Most officers sought Pentagon assignments as career advancement opportunities. Chen was asking to continue the more challenging and less prestigious work of field testing and development. Why do you prefer field assignment, Captain? Because the soldiers who will ultimately implement these approaches deserve leadership that has been tested in the field, not just developed in offices, Chen replied without hesitation. If we're asking military units to trust new methods, those methods should be proven by officers who continue to share the risks and challenges of operational service. General Patterson smiled approvingly. Captain, that response confirms what your performance evaluations have indicated consistently. You understand that leadership is about service, not advancement. He closed his notes and stood. I'll arrange for you to receive field assignment with expanded authority to test and refine these concepts across multiple military branches. You'll work directly with special operations units, conventional forces, and allied military personnel to develop comprehensive training protocols. Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you. Captain Chen, the general said as she prepared to leave, you've already exceeded every expectation we had when we first challenged you to show us what you could do. The question now is whether the military is prepared to change as dramatically as you've proven it can. As Chen left Fort Leavenworth that evening, she reflected on the journey that had begun with General Steele's simple challenge. Her response had broken military records, but more importantly, it had demonstrated that exceptional performance was possible when conventional limitations were replaced by innovative approaches to leadership and teamwork. The military had challenged her to prove her capabilities. Instead, she had challenged the military to reconsider what capabilities were possible. Her story had evolved from personal achievement to institutional transformation, affecting not just her own career, but the future of military service itself. 6 months later, the approaches Chen had developed were being tested by military units across 6 different countries.
Allied forces reported similar improvements in performance, suggesting that her innovations weren't culturally specific, but represented universal principles of effective leadership and teamwork. The young lieutenant who had walked into General Steele's office with perfect test scores and untested confidence had become a captain whose influence extended far beyond her rank or position. She had proven that when exceptional individuals are given the opportunity to exceed expectations, they don't just achieve personal success. They create possibilities that benefit everyone around them. But perhaps most importantly, Chen had demonstrated that the military's greatest strength wasn't its technology, its traditions, or even its courage. It was its ability to recognize and develop exceptional human potential, then create conditions where that potential could transform entire organizations. Her response to General Steele's challenge had indeed broken every military record that mattered, not just records of individual achievement, but records of what became possible when individual excellence was multiplied through exceptional leadership into collective excellence that exceeded what anyone had previously imagined. The story of Lieutenant Sarah Chen had become the story of how exceptional performance could be systematically developed and deployed, proving that the military's future lay not just in better technology or larger forces, but in better understanding of how extraordinary people could create extraordinary outcomes when given the tools and opportunities to exceed even their own expectations of what was possible.
2 years after Operation Crucible, Major Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean Sea. The massive aircraft carrier was serving as the command platform for Operation Unity Shield, the largest multinational military exercise in NATO history, involving forces from 12 different countries and testing the integrated leadership approaches that had evolved from her initial demonstration at Fort Braxton. The exercise represented the culmination of everything Chen had worked towards since that morning, when General Steele had challenged her to prove her capabilities. What had begun as a personal test had transformed into a fundamental reimagining of how military forces could operate together, achieving levels of coordination and effectiveness that traditional approaches had never reached. "Major Chen?" came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Admiral Richardson, the exercise commander, approaching with a folder of preliminary results. "I wanted to personally review the initial assessments with you before tomorrow's formal briefing." Chen accepted the folder, noting the classification markings that indicated the information it contained would influence military policy at the highest levels. "How are we performing against projected outcomes, sir?" "Beyond our most optimistic projections," the Admiral replied, his voice carrying a note of amazement that senior commanders rarely allowed themselves to express. "We're seeing coordination between different national forces that typically takes months to develop. Language barriers that usually create major operational challenges have been almost completely overcome.
Most remarkably, we're achieving mission success rates that exceed what individual national forces accomplish when operating independently. The results confirmed what Chen had theorized, but hadn't dared to hope would prove accurate on such a large scale. The leadership principles she'd developed weren't just effective within individual military units, they could enhance cooperation between entirely different military traditions, languages, and operational doctrines. Sir, what specific metrics are showing the greatest improvement? Admiral Richardson opened the folder and began reading statistics that represented thousands of hours of planning, training, and execution. Communication effectiveness between units is up 47% over baseline measurements. Decision-making speed has improved by 32% while maintaining accuracy rates. Most importantly, mission completion rates are running 68% higher than historical averages for multinational exercises of this complexity. He paused, studying Chen's face. Major, what you've developed isn't just an improvement over existing methods, it's a completely different level of military capability. We're watching forces from different countries operate together more effectively than most individual national forces operate internally. The observation deck grew quiet as both officers contemplated the implications of what they were witnessing. Military exercises typically demonstrated existing capabilities and identified areas for improvement. Operation Unity Shield was demonstrating capabilities that hadn't existed before Chen's innovations were implemented. Major Chen, the Admiral continued, I need to discuss your next assignment with you. The Pentagon wants you to lead the new International Military Cooperation Institute. You'd be responsible for developing training protocols that could be implemented by all NATO forces, with the eventual goal of extending these approaches to allied forces worldwide. It was the kind of assignment that most officers dreamed of, prestigious, influential, and career-defining. Chen's response surprised even herself. Sir, I'm honored by the offer, but I'd like to propose an alternative approach. Admiral Richardson raised an eyebrow. Alternative approach? Rather than centralizing development through a single institute, I think we should decentralize it. Train cadres of officers from different countries to adapt these principles to their specific military cultures and operational requirements. Create a network of innovators rather than a single center of innovation. She gestured toward the activity on the carrier's flight deck, where aircraft from 6 different nations were conducting coordinated operations with unprecedented precision and effectiveness. What's working so well here isn't that everyone is doing the same thing the same way. It's that everyone understands the same underlying principles and can express them through their own national military traditions. The Admiral considered her proposal carefully. That would be much more complex to implement and harder to control from a policy perspective. Yes, sir, but it would also be more resilient and more adaptable to different types of conflicts and challenges. Centralized systems are efficient, but fragile. Distributed systems are more complex, but more robust. Over the next hour, Chen outlined her vision for how military innovation could be spread through networks of trained practitioners, rather than top-down institutional programs. Her approach would require more resources initially, but would create sustainable capability development that could evolve and improve continuously, rather than depending on periodic updates from central authorities. Major Chen, the Admiral said finally, your proposal demonstrates exactly the kind of strategic thinking that convinced us these approaches were worth pursuing in the first place. I'll recommend that the Pentagon implement your network model rather than the institute approach. As the formal meeting concluded, Admiral Richardson asked one final question. Major, when General Steele first challenged you to show what you could do, did you envision that your response would lead to this level of institutional change? Chen smiled, remembering the nervous anticipation she'd felt walking into that office at Fort Braxton. Sir, I knew I wanted to prove I could serve effectively. I had no idea that trying to prove my individual capabilities would lead to discovering what collective capabilities were possible. She looked out over the Mediterranean, where ships from 12 different nations were conducting coordinated operations with unprecedented precision and effectiveness. I think the most important lesson has been that exceptional individual performance isn't about surpassing others. It's about creating conditions where everyone can perform exceptionally. 3 days later, Operation Unity Shield concluded with results that exceeded every success metric and established new benchmarks for multinational military cooperation. The exercise was immediately classified as a model for future operations, and Chen's integrated leadership approaches were designated for implementation across all NATO forces within 18 months. But for Chen, the real measure of success wasn't the statistics or the commendations. It was watching young officers from different countries working together as naturally as if they'd served in the same units for years. It was seeing soldiers who had been trained in completely different traditions, finding common ground through shared understanding of leadership principles that transcended national boundaries. The challenge General Steele had issued, "Show me what you got," had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Chen's response hadn't just broken military records. It had demonstrated that the question wasn't what individual officers could accomplish, but what became possible when exceptional leadership created exceptional collective performance. 6 months after Operation Unity Shield, Chen received a letter from General Steele, now retired, but still following the developments her work had generated. His message was brief, but reflected the pride of a mentor watching a student exceed even the most ambitious expectations. Major Chen, when I challenged you to show me what you had, I expected to discover whether you were ready for elite military service. I didn't expect you to show the military what it was capable of becoming. Your response to a simple question about individual readiness has transformed how we understand collective capability. The young lieutenant who walked into my office with perfect test scores has become a major whose influence extends far beyond what rank or position typically allow. You've proven that exceptional people don't just achieve exceptional results, they create exceptional possibilities for everyone around them. Well done, soldier. Your service continues to exceed every expectation. General Marcus Steele, retired. As Chen finished reading the letter, she reflected on the journey that had begun with uncertainty about whether she was ready for elite military service and had evolved into helping the military itself become ready for challenges that hadn't existed when her career began. Her story had started with the question of what one exceptional individual could accomplish. It had become a demonstration of what became possible when exceptional individuals use their capabilities to enhance everyone else's performance, rather than simply surpassing it. The records she had broken weren't just measurements of individual achievement. They were evidence that the military's greatest strength lay not in its technology or its traditions, but in its ability to recognize exceptional human potential and create conditions where that potential could transform entire organizations and redefine what collective excellence could accomplish. Major Sarah Chen had indeed shown General Steele what she had, but more importantly, she had shown the military what it could become when exceptional leadership was used not just to achieve individual success, but to create systematic excellence that elevated everyone's capabilities and made previously impossible achievements seem routine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.